Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. So we've been spending this entire month of July talking with EWB-USA about their environmental justice and climate resilience initiative. And it's been a whole lot of fun. We already spoke to Kellyanne McLean. She's the brains behind the initiative. She is the Officer of Individual Giving. And we spoke to Scott Gregory. He is a program engineer for the International Community Program at EWB-USA. And we spoke to Ellie Carley and Natalie Selmo with the Community Engineering Corps, who talked about their engineering and justice work in the United States. And so our last interview will be next week. I'll be talking with Gerard Dalziel and Eric Lundberg about the state of the organization, the future of the organization, and how EWB-USA intends to continue to address and correct or help correct environmental impacts on historically underserved populations around the world. I've learned a ton this month. It's been really great speaking to everybody, talking to EWB and thinking about what they've been doing has really got my mind working, thinking about a lot of different things. And I've learned so much throughout this month so far. And I just want to share some of that with you. So let's think back on what we've learned and what we've heard and what we think about these interviews with EWB-USA on this episode of the podcast. Stay with us. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am Dr. Joseph. Thank you so much for listening. So on this episode, I just want to go back and think through all of these interviews we've had this month. Think about EWB-USA. Think about what EWB-USA has been doing. And think through this whole environmental justice and climate resilience initiative that they're promoting. And so if you've been listening throughout the month, you know that on our first episode with EWB, we spoke with Kellyanne McLean, who was the Officer of Individual Giving, and she helped us understand what the initiative was, what the goal of it was, and how EWB is using this initiative to help further their goal of confronting environmental justice and climate resilience issues throughout the world. But when I spoke to her, the one thing I could not stop thinking about was the connection that she made between human rights and environmental justice. She connected her time with Amnesty International as she talked about the need to get basic services to everyone around the world, and she looked at it as a fight for human rights, which is something that I hadn't really thought about until she brought it up, right? So, in the United States, we talk about things like access to health care, education, we talk about housing, we talk about different elements of society here in the United States, and we talk about how they should be considered to be human rights because there's disagreement, right? People don't automatically assume that having a good healthcare plan is a human right, or having a certain level of education is a human right. And so there's discussions and arguments about that. And so in my mind, I'm thinking about those kind of discussions. I'm thinking about human rights violations that you read about in the news, war crimes and the ways in which certain people around the world are just being exterminated and cleansed from their lands and from their homes and being mistreated and being denied certain services as issues related to human rights. But talking to Kellyanne McLean, she made it clear to me, and now that I think about it, it makes perfect sense that having clean air and having clean water to drink and having facilities for sanitation purposes, these are all human rights that everybody should enjoy. We shouldn't be living in a world where people don't have these things, and it shouldn't be understood to be privileges. These are human rights, and these are the kinds of things that everybody should have access to, no matter who you are, no matter where you live. And so when she said that, and she talked about human rights in the context of what EWB is doing and what this initiative is trying to address, it made perfect sense. And so I know for me, I just take the idea of having clean water for granted. And I think about having, air to breathe for granted. Whereas if you're working in these other places around the world where they're lacking, you understand it to be a human right that you fight for, a human right that you advocate for, and a human right that you insist that people have, regardless of who they are or where they live. And so that was just revolutionary for me. When I thought about it, I might need to do an episode that's just about that, or maybe a series even. Human rights and environmental justice. It's really something that I think we should all be more aware of and be more cognizant of when we talk about environmental justice and we talk about why it's important for everyone to have equal access to clean drinking water, sanitation services, waste services, all of these kind of environmental issues that we've been talking about, that we've been trying to address and confront. They are environmental justice issues, but they're also human rights issues. And we should think about them in those terms, human rights. There is no reason why there are people in the world who do not have water to drink that they can rely on. It's a human right. As a human, you have the right to have that. And that should be the way we think about it. And that's the way that we should talk about it. It's not a debate over policy. It's not a debate over economics. It's not a debate about differing ways to manage resources. These are human rights. Clean water, human right. Air that you can breathe without getting sick, human right. A place to go to the bathroom and to wash your hands, human right. These are human rights. And so I really appreciate Kellyanne making that connection for me, because I would not have made it on my own. I'm sure a lot of you listening have already made that connection. You already knew about that. You're probably telling me to catch up. I get it. I'm late to the party, but these are human rights. Environmental justice, human rights clearly go together, and they should never be separated or viewed as distinct from one another. They're all human rights, whether you're in Cancer Alley or whether you're in the Congo. They're human rights that we should all be fighting for and all should be expecting to see available in our communities. Every single one of us. Not just a privileged few, not just these quote unquote developed countries. We should all have access. Clean water, clean air, sanitation services, waste management services, whatever we need to live a full and healthy life. We should have that because it is a human right. Those are human rights. And that was my big takeaway from the first interview with Kellyanne McLean. Human rights and environmental justice, hand in hand, they go together. The second interview we did was with Scott Gregory, who is the program engineer for EWB's International Community Program. And so he talked a lot about the types of projects that they do around the world and how important it is for their volunteers to have the right perspective when they head out overseas and do this work. And so he said a couple of things to me that really stood out as well. So one thing he told me was that a big part of the environmental justice and climate resilience initiative was to help inform and educate their volunteers as they work on the projects. And when he said that, I said, wonderful. Typically when you think about these initiatives, you're thinking about money going directly to a particular project or a problem you're trying to fix and address a particular issue. But to think about it in terms of actually educating and informing and providing the perspective that's needed when people go and work on these projects, that can be life-changing, because now you're not just addressing a problem, but you're changing a mindset, shifting a perspective, And what you hope to see happen is that the people who have now been opened, whose eyes have been opened to the idea that this problem that I'm going to go resolve in this other place is due to an environmental justice issue, or is due to a lack of climate resilience that's present in those communities. It changes the way you confront the problems, and it stays with you after the project is over. And so now you haven't just changed a circumstance, you've changed individuals. And I think that is phenomenal. And I think that's something that every NGO, every humanitarian aid organization should do with their volunteers. Don't just send them over to fix a problem that you saw in the news or that you've heard about from different networks, but actually help your volunteers understand the context in which they're entering. Why is a problem there? What is actually going on here? Why are we needed to go there? I'm sure it's not because the community or the community members did anything wrong. And it's not because the communities themselves are unaware of the issues and unwilling to address them. It's usually because there's some type of injustice occurring, some type of inequity that they've experienced, and they need some outside intervention because the typical networks, the typical means of addressing situations is just not available to them for whatever reason. That's what I would imagine. And it's important for somebody going over to a community, to another country, another region, to be aware of what that is. Be aware of what that is and be aware of why that is. Right? I mean, it could be climate injustice, right? Where you know that climate change is happening, the impacts are more and more severe, but these communities are not able to protect themselves from those impacts, even though they're the least responsible for those impacts occurring. They don't pollute. They're not contributing to emissions. They're not the reasons why the climate's changing, but yet they're experiencing those impacts disproportionately. That could be one thing. You got to find out before you go. What are we dealing with? It could be environmental justice issues, like very direct injustice that they're experiencing on behalf of an industry, a government, a corporation even, right? If you think about things like mining, you think about factories polluting, contaminating water sources, contaminating the air, extracting resources from a community without any regard for what their needs are. That could be another issue that you're walking into as you're trying to address a situation and fix a problem. You need to know what that is before you go. Maybe it's just complete neglect, just indifference. We know you have a problem. We don't care. Maybe the governments don't care. Maybe the local city officials just don't care. They don't want to bother with it. Maybe there's corruption. Maybe there's just a lack of desire to help. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's important for the volunteers, for the aid workers to be aware of the situation before they go and try to engage it. And so it's phenomenal that this initiative, part of its goal is to educate and inform the volunteers, because that is something that honestly doesn't happen very often. It didn't happen when I was in school. It doesn't happen at a lot of different chapter meetings where people are talking about these types of issues. They're just looking for a problem to go fix, a project to work on, but not actually thinking about the broader context in which they're going in to do the work. And so when it comes to addressing things like basic water and sanitation needs, these volunteers need to have the right lens to view the situation through on the ground. They have to have the right perspective and an understanding of the ways in which this problem came to be as they're trying to address it and as they're trying to engage the community with solutions. And so I hope that volunteers who travel overseas to go work on EWB projects or any other group that goes overseas to help with a problem, I hope they educate themselves about the countries they're going to work in, the communities they're going to be working in, and that they start to understand why they're seeing the issues that they're seeing. And if they don't know, they can't figure it out, or if it's just a really small remote place and they don't have the resources to tell them, hopefully when they get there, a community leader will inform them and say, hey, thank you for coming. Thank you for your help. This is what the problem is. But more importantly, this is why that problem is. This is not an accident. This is not coincidental. This is what's been going on here. This is what we've been experiencing. And this is why we asked you to come and help us, because we've tried these other avenues. We've tried these other paths to try to get our problem addressed and resolved, and it didn't happen. And so we're asking you to help us. And with that understanding and that knowledge, not only can the volunteers and EWB and the organizations do great work and really connect with the community, but they can also see other ways that they can advocate on their behalf to continue to allow for solutions to be put in front of them in the long term, and not just doing the short term project, the quick Band-Aid fixes because of the need that was shown in the beginning. There needs to be an awareness and an understanding that goes beyond just the initial project that they're working on. And so that was huge. When Scott said that, in my mind, I was thinking, that is the way it needs to be done. That is money well spent. And the second thing he said that really caught my attention was that they form partnerships with the communities that they serve at EWB-USA. And so for me, that's the key, right? You're not just doing a project, but you're helping people. There are people involved, and you're partnering with them to improve their well-being and their current way of life. That's what we're doing. We're not just providing a water source. We're not just providing a latrine or a school or a road. You're helping lift up a community by partnering with them in an effort to address exactly what their concerns are, whatever they might be, right? And since with EWB, they require you to have an application provided to them that outlines the needs. And so you know when you go there that you're doing what they've asked you to do. You know, a lot of aid groups will see something happen and they'll decide for themselves what needs to be done and go and do that. But with EWB, the application process, the way that they partner, it's right up front that we are here for the community. Whatever the community says they need, that's what we're going to be providing. No questions asked. That's what we're doing. We're not going to come in with our own ideas, our own thoughts about what we think you need. We're here for you. And so I was excited to see that and hear that from Scott. And I initially learned this principle from Dr. Bertrude Albert. She runs this nonprofit called Projects for Haiti. And her big thing is ask before aiding, because she believes that authentic relationships need to be formed and that you need to ask before you intervene. You need to empower and enhance the community so that they can lead the efforts to improve the situations that they're experiencing where they live. It's not about you coming in with a savior mentality here to rescue and save the day. It's about whoever's going in, asking, listening, and then helping in ways that are clearly beneficial to the community members from their perspective. You know, she tells a story about how when the earthquake in Haiti hit in 2010, that she felt moved to action. And so what she did was she got with her friends, they raised money, they received clothing donations, shoes, all kinds of items that they were going to load up and bring to the people in Haiti after the earthquake hit. And so she said they got together, they donated about 400 pounds of clothes, a ton of shoes, not a ton, a lot of shoes, and flew over to Haiti and distributed them. And what was interesting was she said that when they got there, there were people who were very excited about the aid that was being provided, the clothes and the shoes. They definitely needed them. They were there, But she also said that there were other community members that were very disheartened and disappointed and upset about what they did because they had businesses that sold clothes. There were people that made shoes, people who would be able to provide those items to the communities that they lived in. And that was their profession, that was their jobs. And this aid that she brought cut them out completely, undermined their businesses, and they couldn't function and survive because what they would have done, she was doing for them for free. And so as a result, she actually wasn't helping at all. She was taking the legs out from under the community with her aid and rendering them helpless because nobody's going to buy what they can get for free. And so she said she learned a lesson then that you need to ask before helping, to ask before aiding. And so that really stuck out in my mind because it's easy to just think that you know what's best, you know what's needed, to rush and go do it. I know what needs to happen here. But she's saying, and EWB is agreeing, that you don't just go in with your pre-packaged, pre-made, predetermined solutions to a situation. With EWB, you go in, you form partnerships so that when you go, you make sure you give them what they believe they need and not what you believe they need. Because it's easy as a wealthier, more advanced nation to just assume that you know what's required and what's needed in any particular situation. But that's not the case. And so that's why it's so important to form these partnerships and to actually listen to the communities, to the villages, and respond accordingly. And this is true in any context. It doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter at all. You could be providing medical assistance in a refugee camp. Don't just assume you know what to do. You go in there, you ask what the problems are, you ask what the needs are, and you respond accordingly, right? You could be working on water and sanitation issues in a developing country, and you can say, oh, I know what works best here, what kind of water system you need, what kind of sanitation system you need. No, you ask first. What would you like to see here? What are the issues? What is the need? And then you respond. It could be responding to a natural disaster, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes. Oh, I know that when you have a tornado and you go, this is what people need. You don't know that. Ask first. Make sure you understand what they're saying their needs are and respond to those. Because even if you are right that they need this, if they don't think they need it, you're not helping them. You're helping yourself. So you need to be able to listen to them so you can help them with what they understand their needs to be. That's what it means to truly help someone. Not giving them what you want them to have, but giving them what they ask from you because that's what they need from their perspective. So make sure you ask the people what they want and what they need before you take action. And then when you take action, make sure that action is acceptable to the people you're trying to help. Make sure that they agree that what you're doing is what is needed to be done in their communities. EWB does a great job of that with their partnerships and their process. And I think we can all learn from that with whatever work we try to do to help others, to make sure that we have that same mindset, that we ask before aiding. And the third interview I did, it was a great interview. Our third interview was with Ellie Carley and Natalie Selmo. They both lead the Community Engineering Corps, which works to address the lack of basic services that many communities in the United States experience. Right? So, I was excited to learn that although they work internationally with EWB-USA, there's also a program in the United States that works on projects in the U.S. because there are places all over America where the water and the air and the sanitation is just as problematic as any other place in the world. Don't be confused. don't think that every single place in the United States is fully developed, fully functioning, and providing all of the services that are required. That is not the case. They have volunteers throughout the United States that have come to EWB-USA and told them that the work you're doing over there needs to be done over here too. And so it was exciting to know that that's what's actually happening with this community engineering corps. And when I asked them about why it was so important to do this domestic work, Natalie Selmo said something that I just could not forget. She said, engineering with empathy. It was a big statement. Engineering with empathy, and so true. Like, how can an engineer look at a community struggling to meet its basic needs and not act, not have empathy, not respond? Or anybody else, right? A lawyer, a doctor, a counselor, anybody who provides a service. You look at a community that needs that service and you don't respond, you can't do that. We should all have empathy. We should all look at ourselves, look at our skills, and ask, can I enter into the situation and do some good? Is it even possible? And with all the environmental injustice that we see in America, EWB couldn't just look away and keep traveling overseas, right? It couldn't just ignore the reality in its own backyard, right here in the US. It couldn't do that because EWB has the infrastructure, it has the network, it has the personnel, it has the volunteers, it has the funding, it has the ability. And with people like Ellie and Natalie leading the way, it has the empathy, something we should all have. And so they responded. And we should all do the same thing, right? We should all lead and look with empathy, with compassion, right? With care, concern, and whatever skill we have, whatever ability we have, we should use it to help someone in need, no matter who they are, no matter where they are. Don't just make presumptions that because we're in the United States, that they should be able to take care of whatever the issues are. They have no excuse because they live here in such a wealthy, advanced nation. No, there's a problem. You have the ability to help. You should enter into those spaces and help. Make sure you ask first, right? You ask before aiding, but you should go and do that. You shouldn't make any presumptions about why that situation is the way it is. And when you look around across the country, there are many places that need engineering support, that need construction services, that need help, that need funding, that need people who care enough to take time away from what they typically do from 9 to 5 and to help. And I could see that clearly through the interview I had with Ellie and Natalie. These are people who really, really, really care and who are committing themselves to galvanizing others to care also about the things that are happening right around where they live. Not just overseas, not in some other country, but in our country, because we need help too. We have gaps, we have deficiencies, and they need to be addressed. And the best thing about the Community Engineering Corps, which I think could be done better by the International Community Program, is that the Community Engineering Corps also advocates. They also speak out and engage the policy debates and discussions, and they join with other groups to try to come up with solutions to some of these environmental justice issues. They're not simply doing project work. You know, they talked a lot about being a part of the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers program with the EPA, partnering with other groups to provide their support for the changes that people need to see throughout the country, which is amazing that they're doing the practical, they're doing the practice and the policy in this Community Engineering Corps. And so it's a good model for other groups who have services that they provide. Get involved and continue to advocate for the people that you're helping. Don't just simply go in, help with the initial problems, turn that water on, get that electricity going, get that house built, and leave. Ask yourself the broader question. Why is this an issue? Why is it missing from this community? What are the impediments to getting these services in these areas? And then help fight for those by getting engaged in the policy, in the advocacy discussions. That's part of it too. You can't separate the two, no matter how much you want to. If you really want to help and you really want to serve, you have to do it on all fronts. You have to be willing to engage in every arena to help the people who are less fortunate, who are marginalized, who are underserved, underprivileged, disadvantaged. There's a reason why that's the case. And we need to enter into those spaces, learn from them, help any way we can, and then turn away and advocate on their behalf as we continue to do good in the world. That's what needs to happen. And I got all of that from the third interview with Ellie and Natalie. It was so amazing. And so, just to conclude, we've had a good month in July talking to EWB-USA, and I've learned a lot. Our last interview with EWB will come next week. I'm going to talk to Gerard and Eric. They're both engineers, and they're going to be talking to me about the future of EWB and how this environmental justice and climate resilience initiative fits into that future. And I can't wait to learn whatever they want to share, because I've been learning something every time I've spoken with somebody from EWB, right? So, just this month, I've learned about the connection between human rights and environmental justice. I've learned about the need to keep educating people about environmental justice and how that plays into the inequities we see, right? The importance of partnerships and asking before aiding and actually working alongside communities and not out in front of them. And the need for empathy. I think empathy is that connective glue, that tissue that binds all this together. Because why else would you do anything for anybody else? It's out of empathy. I hope it is. I hope you have that connection, that feeling that you really understand the situation that they're going through, that you can see how difficult it is, and that you're moved to help alleviate whatever the situation is to allow those others to have a healthy, whole life and well-being. The need for empathy is really important for all of us, not just engineers. We should all operate with empathy. Empathy for one another. Empathy for those who aren't like us. Empathy for those who we don't connect with on a day-to-day basis. If you read about them, watch the news and see what's going on, empathy should grow, and we should be thinking about how we can help when we see situations that are unjust or unequal. And so that's what's been going on this month. And it's been amazing. And we're going to wrap up our EJ with EWB series next week. But until then, keep thinking about how you can get involved in helping to improve the lives of others and how you can fight for environmental justice wherever you live. There's something we can all do. And while you're thinking about it, if you're not sure, donate to EWB's initiative. They're definitely doing good, and that money will be used for good all around the world. I can promise you that. They are working hard to try to address a lot of these issues, and they're doing a great job, and they're continuing to do great work. So donate to EWB, volunteer if you can. If there are other groups, other organizations where you live, working out in the community, get involved, use your gifts, use your talents, and make the world better. Make this world better. We all have the ability to do that. So go ahead and do it. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time. Bye.